everyone, and welcome back to the Morris Christie podcast. Today we're going to be talking about friendship from the neuroscience and psychology perspective. So I have with me Anthony and Jolly. I was hoping you'd say it, but I forgot your name.
Clearly new at this.
It's all good. So last time we had Father Thomas on, we kind of gave that general overview. So we'll go, they were involved in the research, and so from that perspective, I guess we can, right off the bat, just what was the inspiration to bring neuroscience and psychology into this, or generally for the Institute, the mentality behind that?
So I think that's where, our kind of mission kind of comes into play. Is Institute for Excellence is supposed to be a place where we are doing research. It is scientific, and it's a way for us to culminate all these different sciences together and then offer something practical. And so because we're addressing all the sciences, it only made sense to involve neuroscience and biology as part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I think just adding off of that, with the Institute for Excellence, we have people who are in the researching and working in this.
Mm-hmm.
We have them from different fields. So Jolly's obviously psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
people in philosophy, theology, spirituality, faith. Just wanting to, I guess, that whole idea of looking at one topic or one thing or problem or however you want to see it, and then looking at it through multiple lenses.
Yeah.
But at the same time, not for it to be for an academic purpose, but
Right.
How can we practically apply this to everyday relationships, everyday lives?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first topic that was chosen was friendships, and then we kind of looked at it through these different lenses and tried to come out with an outcome. So one of the lenses which we looked at, which is psychology and neuroscience, I mean, mainly because we know so much more about friendships, or just in general about mental health with the advances in psychology and neuroscience. We've seen so much benefits from that. And so, just it gives us a newer perspective on things, helps us understand, relationships and so on. So,
Yeah, speaking of the backgrounds, I guess that would be important, especially for people that don't know you guys. I know you're a doctor, but you want to go a little bit more into that.
I'm finished med school in India, then did residency in Arkansas, and currently just finished my philosophy at St. Vincent de Paul Regional Seminary here in Boynton Beach, and been helping out with the Institute for Excellence as well.
Jolly?
I'm a PA by profession, and I practice psychiatry. I recently did my doctorate in psychiatry, and I am a few different hats. I see patients part-time, but then I'm the program coordinator for the Institute for Excellence. And then I teach psychiatry at PA University as well.
That's awesome. Okay. Got it. So do you feel like, this is more of a random question, but do you feel like even just from your practice, these are trends you see in a lot of the stuff we've talked about?
Oh, definitely. I mean, when the pandemic hit, just sort of as a practicing Catholic and understanding the beauty of friendships through the Catholic lens, when you see patients on a day-to-day basis and they're sharing all these things that are on their hearts, you kind of realize wow, you need a good friend in your life, which I feel like a lot of us just kind of take for granted, especially those of us who are embedded in communities where that friendship is just so prevalent. But when I see those patients, right off the bat, it's wow, you need a good friend in your life, But then when the pandemic hit, the loneliness issue, not being able to see friends and actually really questioning your friendships, came to a whole new level. And at that point, when you're seeing patients in clinic and they share these things with you, I think it just kind of takes you to a whole new level of helplessness, because they're talking to you about something that is just so systemic, that is such a widespread. I mean, I think their Surgeon General recently talked about loneliness as being an epidemic, right? And so what do you do about that? And so it was pretty amazing how the Lord, in a way, as I was asking these questions about relationships and friendships, at the same time, the Lord kind of put this desire in ACIE's heart to research friendship and offer something back to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just adding on to that, I think like, Dr. Murthy put out that how epidemic of loneliness is, and the pandemic in a way brought that out, but it's been happening,
I
a
was gonna
lot,
ask about
here even
sort
before
of like
that.
a dormant
Yeah,
problem that's
exactly.
been there, but it almost got amplified.
With the
Honestly, in a sense, it was a good thing because it came on the radar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's written even before that,
Yeah.
from his own personal experience, from, from his time in med school and all that, how much, that affected him being lonely. And I think all of us can, in a way, have gone through those periods where there is that loneliness. And even you can say to an extent, I mean, I know in JY we've been blessed with having so many beautiful friendships. And, but even then there's so many people, who've experienced that loneliness and how they felt isolated in those ways. And how can we, I think, friendship obviously is a natural antidote to that loneliness, and coming towards moving from isolation to acceptance in a way.
And do you feel like, for example, just in terms of the ramifications of that loneliness, like what did that sort of entail? Like whether it was patients or in the research, just like what did that look like that you were able to, sort of see symptoms and be like, well, loneliness is a key problem here.
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, one thing was that because it's we have this field of psychology and neuroscience which is so being developed now. We could see like even the loneliness having its physical effects, and obviously we're seeing that a lot during the pandemic, how these physical effects were happening. Like loneliness is an independent factor for all-cause mortality, meaning like if you have loneliness, it affects how long you live, how early you die. It's like, if you have hypertension, or that is a risk factor for say heart disease, or if you smoke, that is a risk factor for having heart attacks and so on. Similarly, loneliness in itself is a risk factor for mortality in a way. So it's very evident here, especially in the US too. And just overall benefits of having meaningful social life has shown like people. I mean, I think all of us know this. Like you probably experienced this yourself, and we probably experienced like having meaningful friendships helps us. There's a sense of fulfillment. We feel happier. There's a sense of fulfillment that we all feel, and so those all contribute to our physical health too, in a way. So
yeah, and just I would say from like a mental health perspective, I can clearly see like when you see patients in clinic, I can put them in sort of like two categories, right? One without friends who have all these like risk factors that Anthony mentioned, like maybe they have hypertension, they have sleep apnea, they have thyroid issues, they have all of these physical illnesses on top of their depression and anxiety, and then and they don't have friends, and then you have the same sort of symptom list, but they do have friends, and you can see just the quality of life being so different. People who have friends, they like go to their doctor's appointments more regularly. They go out and have fun with their friends, and they know how to eat in moderation. They are more physically active because they have places to be and people to meet, and they recover from whatever illness, like let's say happened to them or they're currently going, they tend to bounce back a lot faster. A lot of, I think for those of us who are in science know that like we talk about inflammation in the body quite a lot, and studies have shown that when you are surrounded by people that you love, there are certain chemicals that are released in your body that lower that inflammation, and that's sort of throughout your body. And so when those inflammatory signals are lowered, you get better faster, right? And so we see across the board all of these like physical illnesses also getting either better, or people having the capacity to manage these physical illnesses and having better quality of life just because they're surrounded by really good friends.
Yeah, and even just from a day-to-day practical basis, like how you deal with stress, like having a friend to go through something difficult with you versus having to go through it alone. It makes a difference in how you deal with it, I'm sure. you've experienced that too with friends or Jolly as well. Like when we have someone who's able to be there for us, accompany us, help us in that, or just even be there in that journey.
Yeah.
It just, you often feel like the burden's off of you in a way. There's someone to share that burden, which is a kind of reminder of like how Christ shares our burden with us too.
Kind of two questions that I know weren't immediately part of the research. So yeah, just feel free to share what your thoughts are on it. Just one, do you feel like a lot of the issues that we typically associated with just older people, as people, especially like Dr. Murthy, he did, so much research on the elderly and stuff. But now we're starting to see those trends in just, younger people, everyday people. We're just the same trends, especially regarding loneliness and relationships we associated, maybe especially through the pandemic, sort of became a universal reality. And just, I don't know, like, I guess the health ramifications of that, of like a lot of the things you mentioned, hypertension, all these things that we typically associated with older people. Do you feel like that's sort of going downstream?
I mean, I would say it's still being studied. Probably when our generation gets older, we'll probably know the full effects of it. But yeah, I mean, we could say, like, I think Jolly's gonna talk about it in a as well about or you can talk about it now too. Actually, how our body responds to stress. Yeah. And how there's increased the stress. We have stress hormones that are released. And so, in a way, can we say that some of the rise of autoimmune disease is related to stress hormones? It's probably theoretically we could say that. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're going to need more data and evidence for it. But, I mean, it is possible. It's definitely possible and something worth considering as well. And,
yeah. So when we were doing this research and we were looking at the sort of the health aspect of it, it was so shocking to Father Thomas, I think, found this research which was talking about how if you have a weak social circle, it's basically equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. That's pretty amazing and like really sad. But in general, yes, like, what Anthony was saying, like there's also been research that has been done where we see that as a society, kind of globally, we're seeing these rise in autoimmune issues and just like health issues in general. And like you said, things that we probably encounter at a later stage of our lives, we're seeing them earlier and earlier. There is a theory where it might be because our stress response is much more poor now. And we know that through studies, like if you are surrounded by good friends and you have healthy friendships, those sort of communities, the people in those communities tend to have lower baseline cortisol levels, which is sort of our stress hormone. And they're capable of taking on more challenging issues and going through like social or daily tasks that involve challenges a lot with much more ease.
And this was observed almost at like a communal level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so now imagine if like an entire society is going through this issues with loneliness and your cortisol level is not at that baseline, it's much higher, then, even the most sort of like day-to-day stressors of your life will make you much more stressed out than you would have otherwise. So yeah, I think it's we can, and this kind of ties back into the whole inflammation thing that I was talking about earlier. So in general, we're seeing this rise of like loneliness becoming also like a physical health epidemic, as much as it is a mental health issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is. Just adding to that, I would say like as much as we know that loneliness does this, we also know that friendships and having good social relationships, people live longer. People are much more healthier. That's why in hospitals, like having family members come visit you, making sure that you not feel alone in this journey. Those are all very important aspects of our physical health too. We see like patients recover faster, get off the ventilator faster, like with family members come visiting them, trying to create that environment where they're not feeling alone. So, those are definitely proven facts that having good social relationships, having healthy friendships does allow us to live a, a longer life, a healthier life, a happier life in a way, you could say that. So relationships are an integral part of who we are, we are meant to live for each other and in community, and it's part of our Christian, foundation. It's part of who we are. It's part of our makeup. It's part of who Christ is. He came to live for us too. So, there's no denying that an absence of friendship would result in detrimental effects, and we're seeing those detrimental effects in health and so many other aspects of our lives. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely, there is a physical, psychological, neurological benefit to friendship, and it's very evident in research and studies around. So
what thoughts would you guys have on, I could imagine somebody hearing this and just thinking, like, well, the assumption is that there are good friendships. And I guess this is kind of where, the other research comes into play too, right? Of just, the ramifications of somebody that's like, yeah, that would be great, but it's easier for me to avoid friendships because how do I know the ones that I have will be good, or the ones that I do have right now are causing me more stress? I guess part of, for me personally, I'd be like a sort of challenging to that, because I think even the whole like introvert extrovert thing, exactly. Like I think a lot of people, I don't know what you guys think about it, but like I think a lot of people can use that as an excuse sometimes of like, especially the whole introversion thing of like, because I'm an introvert, it's actually better for me to not, have so many of these relationships. Like, is that something you guys have thought about? And, I guess what is the balance there of like honoring sort of how you were made? Yeah, like there's a sense of the introversion, but that doesn't mean a shying away from friendship, and that like that's not healthy.
Yeah, our research did focus on what we called sort of identifying the right people for friendship, and there's a couple of sort of areas we looked into and some like guiding points that we came up with. The first one was like they have to be people who love and are pursuing a mutual higher good, right? Especially when we looked at it through philosophy and theology lenses as well, that higher good especially had to be God himself. And so, and I think that sort of tracks. Maybe you can speak more into that.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be at least a basic foundation of what both of us or, your friends are seeking. There has to be a good that we all are seeking. And I think that has to be a foundation for a healthy friendship, or a good friendship in a way, because otherwise I think it won't grow beyond a certain level. When I love you, I'm loving you for your sake, so I'm willing the good of you for your sake, we are seeking a higher good through that. You're loving me so that both of us can together grow together towards God, towards love, towards, so that each of us grow with each other towards a certain good. I think that's what, like, finally, when we come to the end of the research and that practical aspect, the two main things that we talked about is, one is unconditional acceptance, and then the second one was challenges, right? Challenges. So, I mean, there has to be an unconditional acceptance, but I think for me personally, I feel like I'm good at this unconditional acceptance, but I'm not very good at challenging others. So, if there's no challenging, there's no growth happening. So, I mean, that both have to happen in a friendship. You can't just challenge people without the unconditional acceptances as well, because then it becomes like, it comes off as very judgmental. You don't feel like you're growing in that friendship too. So yeah, I think having those is important part of friendship. And also, like, these come naturally too. It's not like all of a sudden one day, I accept you, next day I challenge you. These things grow over time, and I'm sure all of us have experienced that in our friendships as well. Like, you grow, even friends go through phases. Sometimes there's a little bit of distance, sometimes you go together, but it's that, that constantly keeping in your heart, you want what's best for the other person, you're seeking good for the other person, and then there's a growth that happens together. I would say, like, I think many times one of the, and I think Jolly will talk to it as well in terms of like what we call barriers to a good friendship too, is that well, at least I've noticed that I'm afraid of people who have a different view than mine. And that there's like a fear that happens when I like that whole introvert extrovert thing. Even like I'm afraid of a person who's different than me because of, you know, I don't want to be in that. Makes me a little uncomfortable. I think that can be a barrier in itself if we have that fear. Oftentimes that I think we see that fear is coming from a place of, if we bring out a different opinion, and that person has a different opinion, what happens to my own beliefs? What happens to my own ideas? Does that get shattered because there's a difference in opinion? And it's sometimes because of from that fear that we're often afraid to, encounter into that relationship with persons from different opinions. And so, but actually research shows that, having friends with people with different opinions, it only actually, you start asking questions about your own ideas and beliefs, which is good, because then you become more foundational. That strengthens your own beliefs. So, having friends with different opinions, different views, different beliefs, those are, it's not something to be afraid of. Those are places where we can have conversation, where we can grow together, and we can be like each other. And I don't know, Jolly, if you had other barriers or adding to that too.
As you were talking about that, it just kind of reminded me of that like part of research that we also did, where when you look at teenagers, they have so many friends, and as you get older, some of my friends joke that they're going through like cutting season,
Yeah.
and you're left with like this group of friends because you become much more particular about who you want to surround yourself with. And part of that is because when you're a teenager, your brain is structured in a way where you're really open to being friends with people who have differing opinions than you. And so you're able to sort of take all of that in and kind of filter that out and take what you want, and then, reject the things maybe that you don't want, but you're able to maintain the friendship like that. But as we get older, our brain structures also change. So we become much more sort of like limited in our viewpoints and who we interact with. And one of the benefits, I think, like how Anthony was saying, like, if we want society to be better, like this becomes a societal issue at that point, right? It's a systemic issue. If you are unable to have so many friendships that can challenge you and offer you different views, then you become a person who has a lot of biases. And so when you're having these conversations on whatever level, right, you're going into these conversations with such bias that it has a ripple effect throughout society, right? And so it becomes really important. And I think our brain structure changes, but I think there's also a malleability, and we have to maybe practice that a little bit. But exposing ourselves to different types of people and being open to being challenged and all of those things are actually really good, and why we should be open to friendships. But the other side of that coin also is how Anthony was talking about, with to do what Anthony just mentioned, like go through so many highs and lows with somebody, be challenged by somebody, get to a point where you feel like you're unconditionally accepted by somebody. Like all of that is going to require a lot of time, space, and effort. And then that kind of, naturally tells you can't have a lot of what we call error-take friendships, right? You might have different types of friendships, but for our purposes, error-take friendships, right? Those type of friendships are going to have to be limited. And so if we're looking at the criteria for how do we choose the right person for this kind of friendship, or persons for these friendships, we have to also look at the desire and the capacity that they have, So like you and I might resonate on a lot of things, and we might really want to be friends, but if we don't have the time and availability and the capacity to agree that, we are intentionally pursuing this friendship, there's a good chance that it might not pan out the way that we want, right? And I think that's something that I'm not sure if it's like a cultural thing, but I know that growing up, I never was taught, or I actually even really saw around me where people would come up to each other. And I mean, when I think about it, it almost kind of sounds funny, like, hey, I really value your friendship, or I really valued the time that I spend with you. I want to take this friendship further. You know, like you never have those conversations. But I think at least when you become adults, I think some of those conversations sometimes are necessary so you can identify whether this person that you want to have this friendship with actually has the desire and the capacity for that or not.
Yeah, I almost imagine like even just from, you know, psychology and neuroscience, you know, I think the reason I brought up even the introvert extrovert thing and just in general the challenges with friendship, because I imagine a lot of people, including myself, have been in this situation where it's like it's so much more stressful and like, you know, even physically exhausting to maintain some of these friendships or to go to a party or to like do these things. So it's like that's not good for my health. But I imagine from, you know, even clinical perspective that like there's a difference between the pains, right? Like, or even if we just bring it down to like a simpler, like general life thing of like the pain of working out versus the pain of an injury. It's like, that's how I have, you know, started to understand it is like, there will be these pains in like developing a good friendship and like the actual stresses and even anxiety and all these different things. But, you know, that might be obviously in a balanced way, things that are actually like necessary to go through to avoid the actual injury of like the pack of cigarettes effect of like loneliness versus those, you know, stressors that come about just because that's like a natural process we as humans need to go through.
I would say like, you know, I mean, you know, there is an effort towards having a friendship, but at the same time, I also feel like friendship is a gift. You know, the Lord brings the right person into our lives, and you know, like if you talk about how you've had some of your friends, I mean, it's not like two individuals introduced you to each other and said, you know, like there's some randomness or chance that probably happened in the process, but after that, you've put in the effort to continue and, you know, think of the joys that it's brought you. And, you know, like I think, you know, there is definitely an aspect of, there is, I don't know if I would put it as pain but there is an effort. And there has to be, but that effort is mutual too. You know, it's not just on one person, because if it's just on one person, then I don't think it's a true friendship. It's that friend who's like you don't like going for a party. He knows that you don't like going for a party and is there with you too, you know, and he shares with you in that. And so I think, you know, that I don't know if I would put it as like a burden or a pain, but there is an effort and you have to be intentional about it. But it's not that you're doing it so that you gain something either. I mean, we're not doing this so that we get all the health benefits, or we're doing this. We're doing this because this is who we are. This is what we're made for. We're made to live in community. We're made to love each other, and friendships is part of who we are. And in not having friendships, what we're doing is we're taking away an inherent part of who we are. So
and that's a key difference, right? Because I think Father Thomas covered this in the previous podcast where he was talking about different types of friendships, right? But what I think Anthony was referring to is very much like the core of what Eritaic friendships are, right? Those excellent, virtuous friendships in which you accept the person for who they are and you're there and you put that intentional effort in. And there is, you know, as Anthony was talking, it was just kind of reminding me of last time when I was in Florida, I was just having this conversation with one of my friends that we've been friends for I think 15 years, right? And she's my daughter's godmother at this point, right? And there was such a divine intervention in that friendship. And we were talking about how the Lord had to intervene in some ways to keep that friendship going. Like if she didn't get her residency here in Boynton, and then if I didn't have this job at ACIE, you know, the amount, like we see each other at every 6 weeks. I live in Texas and she lives in Florida. Like how many friends can we say that are able to see each other with such frequency, living the time zones apart, right? And that is, I would say, the Lord is the only person who can do that for you sometimes, right? So I definitely agree with Anthony when he said that, like, the Lord, it's a gift. The Lord gives you this beautiful gift, and when he gives it to you, he just spoils you rotten with it.
Yeah. And I think that's a important point of just the integration of everything again, where even these benefits we're talking about, it's not like for the sake of the benefits that you go for friendship. It's what we're talking about is that these are the natural effects of anything good for the human person, of like it will be physically good for you. But, you know, a lot of these secular self-help guys can be like, well, this is why you should do this. This is why you should get into a relationship because of all the oxytocin. And then it's like, it just totally corrupts the whole thing. And oftentimes backfires even on the physical side. So,
because then you're doing it you're doing it to gain something, which is in itself, you know, manipulative itself. So I guess that's the whole point of ACIE too, is that, like you were saying, that seeing the whole human person and that integration of everything, seeing the beauty of psychology, neuroscience, you know, the gifts it's given us, and understanding the human person, but at the same time integrating that all into the human person. So yeah,
and I would say maybe as we're kind of talking about this, the next sort of it's a good segue into the next point, where this person, as you're identifying this person, that person also needs to have self-worth, right? Now, if they are or if you or them, you're being friends with each other because there's something to be gained, or their self-worth comes big from the dynamics of this relationship, and they're trying to gain that self-worth from you, I would think that maybe those are some of the friendships when we hear like, oh, it's so draining to me, you know, because there's just so much pressure that is put on. There's so many expectations that need to be met, instead of letting the friends, just allowing them to be who they are.
Yeah, like a mutual gift.
Right, to each other. And then also,
that's where that unconditional acceptance, you know, comes into too. Like, I have to accept Jolly for who she is. She has to accept me for who I am. But it doesn't mean that we just don't leave each other there. There's a challenging too that happens.
Right. And also, you can only do that unconditional love and acceptance with people who you truly feel are honest and have moral integrity. Right. Yeah. The minute that you sense that they don't have that, you lose all trust.
Right.
So at that point, it's sort of, okay, I cannot accept what you're saying because I don't trust you as a person. So I would say, along with, you know, a person who has, so yeah, I guess if you were to summarize it, somebody who has love of a mutual higher good, somebody who has the desire and the capacity, somebody who has self-worth, and somebody who is honest and has moral integrity. I think those would be sort of like the 4 key things to look out for when you're looking for somebody to see, like, is this going to make a really good friendship or not?
And we can always grow in those, like, we're all growing in those aspects of, you know, self-worth. We're understanding our own self-worth as we grow. But like Jolly was saying, there has to be some sort of basic understanding that, you know, of self-worth, of being honest with each other, of having that integrity with each other. You know, that has to be there, because otherwise they just become, like, I think we'll talk about it too, it's like they become dysfunctional. The friendship becomes dysfunctional and there's no growth that happens. And that's when most of that draining or that we talk about happens.
Yeah. No, I think even for me, as I'm listening to all this, I'm thinking about just personal experience of, you know, when I've been in those places of almost thinking too utilitarian. Like, it'd be just, okay, I'm feeling kind of lonely, but I'm also don't want to make the effort to go out and meet other people and stuff. And just physical effects that I didn't even know were from that, but it's just like, it's there, like, you know, very hyper stressed and like eating problems or just feeling tired all the time, or like all these things. And then, you know, even just a change of life, like getting married and living in community and all these things where it's just like, it's so drastically different. But it's not like I was like, you know what, I need to move to Florida so I can, you know, be healthier. Like, sure, that's a desire that's naturally there, but like, that's not why I did it, like we were talking about. But it is a natural effect of just like living a more full humanity and around community, around friendship. I think that's like it was an important lesson for me, and I think set up a lot of the rest of my life. I mean, especially with friendship and community, but I think with many other areas as well, of just, you actually have to take the steps to step out of theory and into like reality of what does this actually take to have these friendships. Like, you know, if you're somewhere where, yeah, there aren't people that have those foundations we were talking about. Yeah. Is it possible to go somewhere else? Okay, yeah, there's realities. Maybe some people can't, but is that a desire you have? Is there ways you can connect with a friend that lives out of state, but make more of an effort to see each other more often? Or like these different things where you actually have to be able to take the theory and, you know, apply it. Otherwise, we'll just forever be in this box. And it's like, okay, we know all these things about the neuroscience and the theology and stuff, but in my personal life, I still feel like in this little box.
Yeah. I mean, that's beautiful. I think, you know, we all have that, you know, like you were saying, we all have this desire, you know, for friendships. And we, like Jolly was saying, there has to be a capacity within us to take that step. But yeah, I mean, like you were saying, it does require some practical reality too, that, okay, I'm going to make an effort to make time for it. Because on paper, like, what does spending time with your friend, you know, productively, there's nothing you can measure that, right? Like having a lunch with a friend or spending time with him or having a phone call. But I mean, that's what we're hoping to bring to this research, that, you know, these things that we think are really not productive or have, you know, really we can't measure the effects of it. We can actually measure the effects of it and see what happens, you know. So, you know, I guess that's part of it, that beauty of you taking that step, you know, to think about friendship, to think about community, and allows you to become more of who you are. And I'm sure for your family too, it becomes, you know, allows you to become a family itself, but, you know, it allows, entire community to grow too.
Is there any other specific areas you guys want to hit on?
Well, I know Anthony mentioned, and this kind of goes off of like, what do you, like once you've identified the right persons and you start getting into a friendship, let's say with somebody, how do you identify if it's a healthy friendship, right? I think that can also be very valuable. And sometimes I think, so after we did this research, we had a seminar, a physical seminar where a lot of people came. And I think one of the most commonly given feedback was, it's so nice to have language to be able to say what was going on in my friendships, right? So we kind of looked through some of the what we call dysfunctional indicators of a friendship, and I think that's something that can be very helpful for a lot of people to just know about them, so that they can have the language to recognize what is happening in their friendships, so that you can also know what to do about it. You know, when we had the seminar, people kind of broke off into smaller groups to kind of discuss this particular area. And it was interesting because a lot of them said that, you know, as they personally reflected on these dysfunctional indicators, they had more tolerance for certain things versus zero tolerance for others, right? It was almost like, okay, here's a list of like, I think 12, and I'm okay with like 4 of these. And, you know, I can definitely have like maybe the person that I'm pursuing this friendship with I can give them more grace to grow in this area. But the minute that this person does this, that's it. Like I won't be able to be friends with that person anymore, you know? So even just like that recognition and how and what to do when you recognize this can be very helpful. So yeah, maybe I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit about the indicators that we covered.
Yeah, I think we talked about it some, like having that honesty and moral integrity. Like, I mean, just think of a time when people break that confidentiality that you hold, you know, and how, I mean, I think it, you know, not talking about like this is like a check, like a tick box where you say, oh, they broke confidentiality and no longer friends, but, you know, having those as, you know, basic indicators that, you know, these are probably not,
it's like an interior gauge of
non-confidentiality. I don't like, you know, gossip is another big thing. And, you know, it's not that, you know, there is a reality of sharing your stories with each other, and, you know, there's an emotional connection that happens. But if your friendship is only based on gossip is what we mean, you know, like, then that probably is another indicator. And I think, like Jolly was saying, the reason why you want to name these, it's like, I think they talk about it in Unbound Ministry, you name it, you're able to recognize it, and then you lose power over it. So it's just a matter for you to help you recognize, you know, what are some of the, like Jolly was saying, what are some of the things that are not good for my friendships, or some of the things that maybe you can work on with your friends too. Like these are things that probably,
Yeah.
And from a psychology perspective, I'm sure there are a couple of things that you guys look into.
Yeah. So when people come in, and I'm not sure if Father Thomas covered this last time, how we were talking about how, you go to counseling, and it's so common to like bring your family, you have family counselors, and you have couples counseling, and you have individual counseling, but you don't often find like a counseling space where you can say like, I'm having issues with my friendship. Yeah. And so can I bring a possible friend over to see what's going on between us? Right. So, and that's part of the reason why it might be hard for people to have that language to talk about why they're struggling in particular friendships. And so, so it's kind of interesting to see, because a lot of these dysfunctional indicators can be applied not only to your friendship, but also in other important relationships in your life, So for example, blame, right? Now, if your friendship, every time you get into an argument in a friendship, and instead of being a team together and figuring out what you can do and problem solving, the conversation's always revolving around, well, whose fault was it? Right? And you're playing the blame game. And well, that's not a very healthy relationship, and that's definitely not a healthy friendship, right? In the same way, if you have an emotionally turbulent friendship where you have this friend, but every time you need to have a conversation about something, you're always feeling like you're walking on eggshells around them, because you just don't know what kind of mood they are in that day, you know, like, so that can be very, very stressful in a person, and to continue in a friendship like that will cause more harm than good. Another thing was tedium. And tedium is a word we use when the conversation, like you just kind of go around in circles. So maybe you're talking about something and you're talking and talking and talking, but you're just like, well, it's been 2 hours later and we're still talking about the same thing, and there's no end in sight, right? And there's just no progress in that conversation. And if you find yourself in friendships where you're just continually just kind of going around in circles, again, there might be a problem there. Again, like Anthony was saying, it's not that you cannot have these friendships, but this is something that you want to recognize early on and see if you're able to work through it, right? Power hierarchy. Now, this is a, I would say, at least from clinical practice, I see this a lot, this power hierarchy. You have often, somebody who's in a friendship who has the upper hand. Maybe they're the smarter one. Maybe they're the more charismatic one. Maybe they are the good one, and they're in this friendship because they're sort of saving the bad one, and trying to be the good influence. And so they take on this responsibility of how this person behaves, and that kind of power hierarchy can be detrimental as well. There has to be equal sort of footing, equal mutual respect and understanding. It's totally natural and fine to have different strengths in a friendship, but it's different if there's a hierarchy in the friendship, right? So it's important to really pick that up. Another was emotional disengagement, and this I think goes back to when we don't recognize if this person has the desire and the capacity for a friendship, because often it would be like they're ghosting you. You're putting in a lot of effort to maintain this friendship, but they just seem very emotionally distant, right? And that can be, it's something, again, I think when we talk about people with friendships, they mention often like, I always feel like I'm always putting in the effort. It's just they're not reciprocating, right? So it can really dry you out. And guilt and shame is another one. If you have people who are in conversations or in your relationship always making you feel less than you are, and you feel like your dignity is being robbed, that's definitely a red flag, right? You should not be, it cannot be a healthy friendship if you're constantly feeling guilty about your friendship, or you're feeling shameful in front of the other person. So clearly means that you're not feeling like they have the capacity to unconditionally love you, right? And then,
I mean, I think, again, like naming these allows you to recognize, what's going on in your friendships, and what's going on in your lives with these friendships. So yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, is able to recognize these. But even like just thinking about like I'm sharing with you, and then it's only it's only happening one way. Like, that vulnerability is only happening when I share with you, and I'm not getting much back, or lack of reciprocity, if you can call it. Those kind of those are things that will be a stumbling block in growing in friendships as well. Or even, I mean, lack of boundaries is another one. I know I was just talking to someone recently. They were sharing how, like, in JY culture, there are no boundaries. Everyone steps into the others, and so I mean that helps you grow in a way, like, because otherwise, there's that you're in this protected kind of way. But like having some sense of the other person's boundaries, and when would crossing that line be harmful to them than causing good. And those are some of the things that that we hope that people can recognize as what we call dysfunctional indicators. And these are all there in the white paper, which hopefully we can add to the link to the show as well. All these that we talked about, whatever we talked about with the links for the research, are there in the white paper. So I hope people can take a look at it if they're interested, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you. Any final thoughts, Abhi? Jolly?
No, I'm just thankful, and like I said, there's so many personal experiences, sort of, just going through. It's like hearing it, it's like, oh, this is where that applied. And I guess I got one last thought for me, even thinking about some of how a lot of the sort of key indicators you mentioned. I was just thinking about how a lot of those also like tie into each other too. Like even those are integrated with each other. Like, there can be, for example, with the guilt, sometimes there can be even like a perceived hierarchy that's not actually there, and then one person feels guilty, or like there are like things like that where it's like, even like you said, not thinking about it as a checklist, but actually going through and seeing like these indicators of where might these be playing into each other, and where I might have actually been contributing this to the friendship without even knowing, but this is the nature of it. And then just having those conversations rather than being like, oh, this, and this, there's, 3 out of 4 that I can't go with. And
all friendships will have, in some way, shape, or form, a little bit of, some
and
of these
different phases too.
Different phases. And so just being honest about them with your friends, I think that helps you grow in where you are, and allows you to grow beyond that. So.
Yeah, I think that's important. And maybe, again, like I said, maybe it's a cultural thing sometimes where we're not taught to have conversations, like deeper conversations about our friendships. And I think there are, people out there that are amazing and would be great friends. But sometimes you see that the friendships don't survive because there's this reluctance to really talk about what's on their heart, right? And sometimes when you just have an honest conversation, it makes that bond a lot deeper. And that also sort of reminds me, one of the things that I think would be worth mentioning is that it's okay to discontinue a friendship as well. I think we talked about this as like the death of friendship. Is that okay to have a friendship die on you?
I'll have to go deeper on that on the theology podcast, because we can like over spiritualize it. I think I know I definitely can, of like, well, I have to take it on the other cheek. I have to get through it. If I'm really unconditionally loving, then how could I let go of this friendship?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, when you talk about this, with the person and with other people that are in your life that can really guide you and who also know you really well, can give you that feedback that, maybe it is okay for this friendship to die. It's not a bad thing, but also, maybe you can work and grow in this friendship, and that would be a beautiful thing.
Awesome. Anthony, do you want to maybe close this in a prayer just for the audience, and then
sure,
gift of friendship?
Thank you for asking, Abhi. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, Holy Spirit, Lord Jesus, we thank you for bringing us here together, sharing our hearts with each other. We thank you for the gift of friendship that you've given us through you, but also with each person that is in our lives as friends. Lord, we hope that as we we continue to grow in relationship with you, that our friends may bring us closer to you, knowing that you are the one who leads us to unconditional acceptance, to challenging us to greater heights. We thank you for gift of ACIE and all the people involved. We ask that you continue to bless all those who are listening, that they may be able to grow in virtue, in love, in charity. We ask this all through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks again, Abhi, for having
Thank
us.
Thank you
you.
both.
Opening your home to us. Thanks, man.